The sky is falling. The sky is falling on this episode of Pushback.
Go, 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 Jonny, go, 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 Jonny, go, 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 Jonny, go, go.
If you're concerned about the direction our culture is heading, then maybe it's time to push back.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pushback. I'm Dr. Jonny, and I want to start this podcast by making a slight correction to something that I said in my podcast entitled Rough Climate. This was just a few podcasts ago. I referenced the sky is falling as the little red hen, when actually it's Chicken Little. I don't know if you caught that error, and if you did, I apologize, and I make a retraction. It is actually it's actually Chicken Little that said the sky is falling. Acorn falls on his head, goes around telling everybody the sky is falling. Little Red Hen is a completely different story. I think it had something to do with baking bread or something like that. But it's an important distinction that I get that right, because I want to talk about that more in detail based on a viewer's response to my podcast, Rough Climate. And I want to go through that response in detail because I'm so appreciative of it. Chicken Little has a moral message, and the moral message is as follows. Number one, don't form incorrect conclusions from insufficient data. That's true. Number two, don't stoke fear in others without good cause to do so. And number three, don't take other people's word for things, especially when other people are making extraordinary claims, which should require extraordinary evidence. Boy, I'm glad that I've made that correction and talked about Chicken Little, because that so lines up with really the topic of climate change specifically. A viewer and or listener responded to that podcast, I believe, so respectfully. And I just want to go through paragraph by paragraph the things that I want to emphasize and some things that I want to bring clarification to. This is what she wrote. Thanks again for your podcast and your heart for helping families and shaping godly culture, as it is so hard to know what is true and what isn't in our world today. I try to double check everything I hear and read other than God's word. I have been duped in the past when I believed something that I thought was credible and then found out it wasn't. I can't say that I always do it. However, I've seen so many good people distracted from the only real truth that we have, the Bible, and even twist God's own words when they don't question and discuss with others with humble hearts. Thus, I wanted to share some information with you. So I just want to comment on that paragraph. Thank you so much for saying that. And I want my listeners to double check what I say, the things that I look into. Now, I do pride myself on digging and doing research and trying to bring up-to-date information the best that I can to you as a scientist, as a dad, as a minister, as a physician, and all the different hats that I wear on this podcast. I try not to just haphazardly throw data out or skew data or something that just supports my idea. In fact, I do try to look at both sides. And I think this response to my podcast will help me do that. So please double check everything that I say as well. That's just prudent. She goes on to say, I don't know where you read the article about the 1,600 scientists signing there is no climate change emergency document, but I found a few sites quoting the organization's Clintels initiative. For every article I read about climate change emergency denial, there are dozens or more from scientists claiming it is an issue. And even though there are 1,100 plus signatures on the Clintels document, many with ties to the oil and gas industry, by the way, so are they really unbiased? There are over 80,000 signatures from reputable scientists signing a UN document saying that there is an issue. Since I know you have a desire as a doctor to uphold accurate, true science, and you spoke about this in your podcast, I encourage you to read more from a variety of sources. Now, I will respond to say that and just defend myself that I do read many sources. I am limiting myself to a 20 to 25 minute podcast. And so I try to give a summary or pick an article that summarizes my position based on multiple research that I've done. So I'm familiar with the studies that you've talked about. I'm certainly familiar with the scientists that do think that there is an issue. I have read those, I've put those side by side, and yet I still have concerns. And I think it's important, as I will say in just a minute, that these 1,600 scientists have come out with a powerful position against some of the claims that are being made. She goes on to say, you talked about scientists getting money from government grants, and because of that, they aren't trustworthy because they are just saying what the person in power wants them to say. If that happens, which it probably does too often, then it would have to happen also with those scientists saying the opposite, that using fossil fuels, etc. is perfectly fine. Did you really mean to say that our country's scientific research is heavily dependent on whether there is a Republican or Democrat in power, or that the research on climate change differs depending on who's paying? What about all the scientists all over the world saying that there is an issue, even from countries where the media is way more regulated and less biased on than here? What about all the peer reviewing and attempts to punch holes in other theories all the time, regardless of who's paying? If the vast majority of scientists say there's a problem, then we should listen. So respectfully, I want to make a point about a very critical difference in what was written here. Now, here's the difference, and it goes back to Chicken Little. If you make a claim that requires a change, then you have the burden of proof. And that is a very critical difference and a critical clarifying point when it comes to this discussion about climate change. If you're making the claim that requires a change for people to follow what you are saying, then you have the burden of proof to show that what you're saying is true. For instance, smoking is bad for you. Well, that's a general claim. But we as physicians then have spent decades gathering evidence that shows irrefutably that smoking kills you. It's almost connected to every form of disease that your body can obtain. So smoking is bad for you. I can say it with with an incredible amount of authority and proof behind what I'm saying because I am looking to make a change. You need to quit smoking. I've said that to my patients probably hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe thousands by now. You need to quit smoking. I say that because I making a claim, smoking is bad for you, that requires a change. You need to quit smoking. The burden of proof is on me. It's actually not on the cigarette company. They do not have the burden of proof that to show that my claim is wrong. Does that make sense? The cigarette company doesn't have the burden of proof to prove that my claim is wrong because they want you to just keep doing what you're doing, keep smoking. So they have no burden of proof. The burden of proof is on the person that makes a claim that requires a change. So they teach evolution in our schools. I don't have a burden of proof to prove to them that creation is true and evolution is wrong. Actually, all I have to do is create a dialogue to force them to prove that what they're teaching our children is true. And guess what? They don't have a leg to stand on. There's no science in what they are talking about. It's all conjecture. It's all theory. You can see my other podcasts on that. They have the burden of proof to prove that what they are teaching is true. Because that's what's being taught in the school. That's what's being taught. They have the burden of proof. They are making a claim that evolution is true, a very strong claim. And so I can come along and say, actually, what you're teaching isn't true. I don't have to prove some other alternative theory is true. They have the burden of proof to prove that what they are doing, changing the curriculum to show that evolution now is true, they require a burden of proof. This is very, very important when we talk about climate change and global warming. They have claimed global warming, found out that it wasn't true, so they called it something different now. It's called climate change. Also not accurate, because they haven't ever shown that we're having more natural disasters or anything that we've ever had before. They said that the ozone has a big hole in it. Guess what? The ozone hole is closing because it had more to do with sun flares that it had anything to do with carbon emissions. They were wrong about that. They said the polar caps are melting. Guess what? The polar caps are expanding. We don't hear about those things, but they have the burden of proof. And so I don't have to. The oil companies, they actually don't have to bring the burden of proof. It actually relies on the person making the claim that requires a change. So there is a strong push right now by climatologists to decrease emissions down to 0 by 2050. They're making a claim that requires a humongous change at a very large economic price. Very large, hurting the socioeconomic poor status of people the most. That's why we're paying so much at the gas pump. That's what I talked about at the last podcast. The burden of proof on them is to show that what they're saying is true. So 1,600 scientists signing a document that says that there is no climate emergency is all we need to hear to start the conversation that what they're saying isn't true. 1,600 is more than enough. It's more than enough. So even it's not keeping score. There's 80,000 on this side and 20,000 on this side. It's not about keeping score. And it's certainly not about the vast majority of scientists agree. That's not science. It's what's true. What they're claiming is true. They have the burden of proof to show that what they're claiming, which is that we're in an emergency, and this is why we believe that we're in an emergency, their data is faulty. It's not lining up. And these 1,600 scientists came along and said, what you are saying simply isn't scientifically true. And it needs to be true because it's causing extreme financial hardship, especially on the poor communities. Now, if what they're saying is true, then it's worth the financial hardship. We need to figure it out. It's like quitting smoking. You got to just quit. You got to figure it out, no matter how hard it is. So let's go back to Chicken Little. Don't form incorrect conclusions from insufficient data. Don't stoke fear in others without good cause to do so. And don't take other people's word for things, especially when those other people are making extraordinary claims, which should require extraordinary evidence. I just believe, this is my opinion, that they have not given extraordinary evidence to back their extraordinary claim. They just haven't done it. Maybe they will, and that'll change my mind. And it ought to. And we ought to pay attention, which is what this listener goes on to say. She says, the point I'm trying to make here is that as Christians, especially as Christians, we shouldn't be trying to refute all science surrounding climate change, but study it from all angles with humility and wisdom. We are to take care of this planet that God gave us, and we should be on the forefront of looking for sustainable energy, less pollution, less waste, clean water, etc., in order to be a light in this dark world. Even if it isn't an emergency or as dire as they say, we only create a stumbling block for unbelievers when we say there isn't a problem and we don't try to be part of the solution. It's so well said, and I so appreciate this paragraph, and I agree with it 100%. And I would never make a claim that there isn't a problem. That would shift the burden on me. But we do need to be on the forefront. We do need to listen to the data that's out there. I think that's super important. I think it is wrong for us as Christians to just simply dismiss this as some kind of political, Republican, conservative issue. That's not what this is. This is for our children and for our land. She says, I have lived and traveled all over the world and grew up in a very conservative, loving Christian family that never talked about the environment. Ever since I was a child, I've always loved being outside and appreciated God's creation. Before ever learning about climate or environmental issues at a young age, I knew instinctively that we humans treat the creation that God made for us like a rental and have done much harm in disobeying His commandments to take care of this world. I didn't need a scientific report to tell me that there was a problem brewing. Since then, I've seen with my own eyes while driving and sailing in various seas and oceans just how much more plastic is in the ocean in just over a decade and how it affects marine life. I've seen entire forests of trees covered in plastic bags in Mexico. I've watched people suffer and die from cancers most likely caused by exposure to pesticides and other chemicals. I could go on, but this is getting too long as it is. Is there a climate emergency? I don't know. But I don't think it's a hoax. At worst, it's an over-exaggeration to try and motivate people to take the problem seriously. I so appreciate the passion in what's written here, and I'm with you. I mean, I have a wind turbine on my property. I have a geothermal system. I care about the environment. My family will testify. I pull over when I see a little piece of garbage along my driveway. I care about the environment, and it bothers me when I go to places and snorkel in the ocean and see waste underneath the water. I don't get it. I don't understand what washes up on the shore. I don't understand how that's even possible. So I am so with you. But remember, they are making a claim about carbon emissions very specifically and how it's affecting us and how it will affect us in the future. And so they have the burden of proof to give the extraordinary evidence to make this extraordinary claim. So I will concede that maybe the word hoax is a strong word. They used it powerfully, and maybe it's too strong of a word. Maybe your over-exaggeration word is a better word. But we can't manipulate information, science, or an acorn clunking us on the head to motivate people to take a problem seriously. That's bearing false witness, and that's also not okay. We need to be scientific about what's happening, and I believe that we do have the scientists to do it, and we need to listen to it, we need to scrutinize it, and we can always do better. They're claiming the emergency. They're saying literally the sky is falling, and we have to ask why. And I believe that some of them can be just those with good intentions, like the person who wrote this response. Good intentions, good heart. And I am so with you on that and so appreciative of this heartfelt, sincere, and respectful response. I love this. I love to be able to talk about this. But I also believe some people are being scared into it. Being scared by data. I believe that there is big money involved in this that's causing a shift. And I believe that there are power-hungry people who sees this as an opportunity to grab it. And so we have to sift out some of these things. We have to sift out some of the bias that is there to find out what is true. So can we do our part to clean and help the environment? Absolutely, and we need to do that. We need to be the forefront. Christians should be the most responsive to climate and to the environment. But does it mean that we all need to go buy electric cars? I don't know. The electric cars have their own problems. So we need to be vigilant. I believe that we can move forward with good intentions and still demand a burden of proof. Still demand it. I believe that we can move towards cleaner alternatives within reason of economic abilities. I believe that there's a way to do that. I don't think we need to bankrupt our country. I don't think we need to bankrupt individuals in order to accomplish it. Unless there is an absolute burden of proof with extraordinary evidence that shows that we need to act now and extremely, no matter the cost. I just don't believe that burden of proof has been met yet. Hey, I just want to encourage you to send in your responses to some of these very controversial topics. I'm going to treat your response with the respect, hopefully, that I did with this response as well, because I agree with 95% of what she wrote. It's so well written and so important and so respectful. And that'll be my response as well. So please send in your responses. Please try to hear my heart. You absolutely don't have to agree with what I say. In fact, I want to have discussion, and I can be correctable. I don't have all knowledge or truth. I just want to begin to have discussion with honor, because I believe that just makes us better. And so I believe that this viewer brought some clarification to my previous podcast that I believe helped and brought such balance to the things that I've been saying. And so I'm grateful for that, and will continue to be grateful for your response. So please go to pushbackculture.org, pushbackculture.org, and please leave responses, comments, questions, future topics that you wish I would talk about. Alternatively, you can go to gofam.org and look at our resources there for family, because family sets the culture. And that's where it always begins. The dining room table is a powerful place. It's a powerful place for topics, for great ideas to come forward, and your kids will surprise you because these things are being talked about all over their environment. So let's be proactive. Let's be on the forefront. Let's be those people. And let's do that now as we go together to set and shape the culture.